Every Berliner knows Tempelhofer Feld, but did you know that there was a site of Nazi forced labor right next to it? My friend Tina is going to tell me all about it.
Nazi Germany deported millions of people for forced labor during the Third Reich. 400,000 forced laborers were working in Berlin and the surrounds. But what was different about the 100 who were living here, right in the middle of Neukölln, was that this was the only known forced labor camp that was financed, planned, operated entirely by the church. So here you see the foundations of the barracks. This is where they used to live. Here was a building to house 100 men. It was atrociously crammed. Each man had only 3.5 square meters of personal space. And speaking of the prisoners, over here the memorial has placed 25 black poles. On the side of each is a name. So they were able to find through their research the names of 92 people who were forced into labor here. We know there were 100 at each time. We don't know how many people actually were living here between 1942 and 1945 when the camp existed. You'll notice that some poles are blank. That's to commemorate the we don't know how many forced laborers who they weren't able to identify. So most of the men who were sent here to labor were from the Ukraine. They were all what the Nazis called Ostarbeiter, or Eastern forced laborers, so deported from the Soviet Union. The youngest was only 15 years old when he was deported to Germany for labor. The oldest was 66. Now, what were they doing? Why was this run by the church? They were burying the dead in Berlin's cemeteries. We know that they worked across 66 cemeteries, which means that they were working in the majority of cemeteries in Berlin. A lot of what we know about the camp comes from this. The diary of a Ukrainian man named Kudrenko, who was here as a forced laborer. He describes particularly what it was like being bombed, because of course this camp was right next to Tempelhof Airport. It was a major target for bombing raids. The camp was actually destroyed in 1944, of course reconstructed, continued to be used, but it shows how vulnerable it was as a target. Kudrenko describes the fact that they weren't allowed to take refuge in air raid shelters because they were considered subhuman races by the Nazi ideology, so they had to get creative to survive. He describes taking refuge in the subway stations, between coffins, and even in sewers.
Following the end of World War II, this site lay forgotten for about 50 years.
When the church uncovered the story, they tracked down 10 survivors who received compensation from the church for the rest of their lives.
However, there are no survivors around today, but in the last couple of years, this site has been turned into a memorial.